Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill him! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
Instead of doing like a crazy intro, I will give you something. You are one of my favorite Twitter mutuals. I learn a lot from you. I'm really excited to have you on my show because it has been like a kind of like a year in the making, I think. But I'm really glad that we can make it happen. And you did a great episode on rejects. So let me shout that out. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Krystal. So if people aren't familiar with you, give everything that you want to give and also your book.
Yeah. My name is Krystal Drinkwater. I go by Domino RXXX on Twitter. I've been an herbalist for about a decade now. I went to school at Wildwood Institute in Verona, Wisconsin for a year. That was Western herbs. And I took a year off and I learned a little bit about Chinese medicine. And I thought that their diagnostic system was unique and useful and practical. And so I decided I wanted to go learn more about Chinese herbalism. So I found Bob Lindy, who runs Tradition School of Herbal Studies down in South St. Pete, Florida. And I went to that school for 2 years and learned a whole bunch of cool stuff. And along the way, I've attended a few different schools. Matthew Wood is one of my teachers as well. And
I know Matt.
oh,
I've
really?
met him several times. Yeah.
That's awesome. I've actually never met Matt in person. All of my classes have been online, and of course, I've read a whole bunch of his books. And
We'll talk about this. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. That's really cool. And it's funny because Matt lives in Wisconsin, and you'd think that I would know every single herbalist in Wisconsin, but I don't.
It's a big country.
Yeah, right. So yeah, Matt does a lot. He had a class called Real Spirit Journey for a while. I'm not sure if it's still going on, honestly, but one of the guys that was running that class in particular is a trained remote viewer. So I did a little bit of that. Down in Florida, one of the women that helped run the school I attended, her name is Renee Prince. She does a lot more Western herbs, but like the shamanistic side of it. So I've got a little bit of that. During COVID, I did some online training with a school down in the Southwest that did they have a lot of South American and Native American teachers that they have on, and that was pretty cool. So I feel like I've got a wide variety of herbal training, but really my background is mainly in Western herbs and of course Chinese diagnostics. And so that's
best of both worlds, really.
Yeah. And I picked up some auriculotherapy along the way too. So I learned how to use ear seeds. Honestly, at work now, I work at Hoey Apothecary in Monona, Wisconsin, which is basically a little town within the city of Madison. And I do almost as much with ear seeds now as I do with herbs. And people come in all the time and I get to learn from them, and I hopefully help them too.
Well, from some of the obviously you keep it very private, but sometimes when you talk about cases on X, I find it very like reifying because I can see like you have like a consistent sort of like treatment practice where you or treatment protocol, excuse me, and you say like I obviously I believe you, but you're like I'm a results oriented herbalist. Like you like things that work, so I really appreciate that about you because sometimes with well, there's two things. So sometimes with woo herbalists, they go too far into the I guess the homeopathic potencies or the more metaphysical potencies of the herb rather than its actual medicinal quality, which I agree. There's both things, of course, but I think you can go too far into that. And then, but then I also think you can be too far into like the sort of scientific, just like purely phytochemical reactions in the body, whatever's going on, this is exactly why it's working. And I think you also talk about that that's not all that herbs are, or not all that plants are for sure.
Right, right. It's like if you imagine five circles and there's Venn diagrams for all of them, like you can approach things from multiple ways. One of the things I really like about flower essences is that if you learn about the spiritual qualities of plants, and then you know what the medicinal qualities of those plants are, you can almost, say, oh, this person is a mullein person. So maybe it's not that they have a respiratory infection so much, it's that they need the spiritual qualities of mullein imbued in them, if that makes sense. So I feel like there's a lot of different ways that you can approach things. And obviously, Western herbs and Eastern herbs, they use the same plant for very different things. And so, if you know about all of those different uses, specific indications, spiritual indications, you can be a much better herbalist, really have a more holistic approach within herbalism to help people resolve whatever it is that's going on, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it totally makes sense. Not that I'm a clinical or practicing herbalist in any capacity, but it makes sense to me just through like I always liken everything to Kabbalah because everything really comes down to that. But yeah, exactly what you're saying is like there's a five layers of correspondence. You kind of like try and match those layers and see the archetype of the person. I know Matt Wood talks about this a lot, about the archetype of like certain characteristics, or he'll say I'm trying to think. In one of his books, he talks about like an echinacea person. I think he talks about like a wild bergamot person. And it's been a long time since I've read it, Crystal, so I apologize. But
Oh, no
I mean,
worries.
he's definitely you're speaking like the language that I recognize.
Yeah, and if you've read several different herbalists or studied under them, everybody's got their own voice. And I feel like between my teacher, Bob Lindy, and David Winston,
I've read some
and
of his books too, Bob's. I've
really,
definitely
I don't
read.
think Bob's has he
You don't.
written?
I think he has. I think he has a book on how to run a successful Chinese apothecary. I might be
Oh,
wrong.
no, no, no. I think you're right. I don't know if that's a book. I know he teaches a class, but it's entirely possible he has a book and I just don't know about it.
No, maybe there's a different Bob. I'm just drawing from my memory of like what I read.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're right about he does teach a class on that. And I think he taught that at the last American Herbalist Guild meeting. Um, but yeah, they all have different ways of looking at things. And I feel like if you find a couple of herbalists that you can understand their language or that you can connect with in some way, even if it's like a parasocial relationship, you don't actually have to know them.
Absolutely.
That can really be helpful when you're getting started. So my teachers, David Winston, Bob Lindy, um, Matthew Wood, obviously, and there's really I call a lot of different people my teachers because anybody that I've learned from is my teacher in a way, and they might not have any idea who I am. Um, but there's a lot of them out there, and I feel like everybody's got their own way of talking about herbs and how they
Mhm.
use them. And like I said, rejects, it's like the plants can also share things with you specifically that other people don't talk about. And so, if you learn from books or videos, or you actually take classes, um, or you just sit with the plants, you can end up with a pretty broad um, education. So there's no right or wrong way, I think, to learn about herbs.
Absolutely. And as when you brought up the rejects episode, so I kind of brought this up not as a gotcha, but just more because it was a foundational program for me, which is Herbal Highways on KPFA. Karen Saunders. So during her arc, no, so not her students who took over, but her arc, he would often talk about this. And it wasn't the first time I'd ever heard of, talking about indigenous plant medicine and sitting with the plant and being like in tune and listening, active listening, or like or reciprocal kinship relationship, as maybe some would say. But it was maybe the more profound things because at that time, I obviously lived in Toronto and it was like this crazy hectic life. And so that was kind of a respite for me. It was to listen to her talk about herbs and plants. And she would often say, like, just the presence of them can be healing, just the idea of them can be healing. And so I think that sort of set the seeds, if you want to use that metaphor, for me to sort of recognize a deeper sort of relationship and layer that we can have with plants and obviously especially medicinal plants.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Um, just, I'm sure anybody can relate to this. I think I said this in rejects too. Like if you are driving in the Driftless region and you come around a bend and you see this huge hill full of mullein, and you can hear the bees buzzing and you can hear the birds singing and you can see this dappled sunlight kind of hitting it. That scene in and of itself is healing and medicinal and telling you something about mullein, right? And that's the picture I posted recently on X. It was just like it was an old picture, so it was kind of blurry, but it's a big hillside in the Driftless just full of mullein. For whatever reason, there's a whole bunch of trees that had kind of fallen, and so there was wood everywhere and just mullein growing up all around it. And I don't know what it means, but it's just you turn that corner and it's like, oh wow, like this is healing land. And so yeah, you don't even have to know anything about the plants. Just seeing them, being in their presence. Yeah, I totally agree with that teaching.
Well, what's interesting, not just that mullen has come up twice, well, at least as many times as you and I have been in dialogue, but it also is a land reparative. So I think maybe we should change tact a little bit, and you can talk about the driftless because I know this is like maybe a geo-ontological ancestor or relationality that you have. I don't know, discovered, recognize, or just something that you appreciate quietly. But it's something that I see that you post a lot. So explain to people what the driftless is and why it's important.
The Driftless region of Wisconsin, and it also touches parts of Minnesota and Iowa, is the part of the upper Midwest that was not covered by glaciers during the last ice age. And so the land there it's not flat like it is in other parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. Everything that is there has been there since before the last ice age. So for the last, oh, please, geologists, don't get mad at me, maybe 20,000 years at least. Um, and you can tell if you're driving through that area, there's a lot of coulees. A coulee is like what Appalachians would call a holler. It's where the when the water was melting, it kind of created these deep crevices. And all of the plants in that area seem to have a lot of, much higher medicinal potency and spiritual qualities as well. And I'm sure that there's a lot of different places around the world that have this, but there's something special about the driftless. And I think there's a lot of herbalists out there that would agree with me. Um, but it's a beautiful, beautiful part of the upper Midwest. And there's a lot of sandstone, there's a lot of caves, there's a lot of rolling hills, not mountains, but just it's very hilly. There's a lot of different tree cover, deciduous, not so much pine trees. You'd see that more in the north, but there are pine trees. Um, yeah, it's beautiful healing land. It's some of the last topsoil we have left on Earth, and really good farmland, and not all of it is really easily farmed. So there's a whole lot of areas that are just natural areas that have lots of different herbs that have been growing in the same spot for thousands of years.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I love that. So I know that you sort of touched on this at the very beginning, and then obviously just now talking about the Driftless. But how important do you think the regionality of herbs are? It doesn't matter. I think that we're on the same page with this. Is that sometimes herbs can appear, whether they're naturalized or quote unquote invasive. I know this is a very hot topic among herbalists, especially the older ones. What constitutes an invasive herb? But or a native herb. So, like, regardless of whatever category you could put it into, I think that there is a relationship that herbs are attracted to, perhaps the constitution of the people in a specific region.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And I think, and not to get too religious, I wouldn't say I was not raised a religious person, but to me, the fact that a plant shows up wherever it is that you live when you need it the most is evidence of a higher power. And I think that the land needs those plants to heal as well. So when you're driving down the highway and you see a field that is has hogweed growing along its perimeter, that's nature saying like, "Hey, this is a cornfield, and this land needs to heal. You need to stop spraying Roundup on it. You need to stop exposing it to all of these toxins." And that's what that hogweed is it's trying to protect the land and it's trying to heal the land. And plants do the same thing for us. For instance, a while back, my neighbor had some motherwort just pop up in the yard, and it doesn't grow in my yard, but he had some heart signs. If I looked at his face and I read his tongue, there was definitely some heart signs there. And so I told him that he should use that. And that was the plant's medicine coming to him and trying to help. And I think that that's how plants work. And I think that you could probably step outside of your door and find 5 to 10 plants that are really there specifically for you and or to heal the land. I feel like I kind of got off in the weeds there. So,
Not at all. Not at
okay,
all. This is that kind of show. I want you to go as
no
far
pun
as you want
intended.
into the of course.
um,
But yeah,
but yeah, I do think that there's people that live in a certain area tend to have similar characteristics. They tend to be exposed to the same bugs that are going around. They tend to be affected by the same, um, y- you know, for instance, Roundup, like in Wisconsin, like we have tons of cornfields and that stuff gets in the water, especially when you talk about dairy farming. Like they use manure on the fields, the nitrates get into the water. So it makes sense that the plants that you need, that the land needs, and that the humans that live on the land and the animals as well need show up in direct proportion to how many people need them. And that's how I see it. So I'm a lot less willing to call all plants invasive. I
I
understand
agree
that
with you.
if you bring in kudzu, for instance, that it can take over and really change the entire landscape. That is 100% true. I'm not disputing that, but I do think that, kudzu has a lot of medicinal value, and it's not that it's necessarily practical to go dig up all of the kudzu and, hand it out, but really that's what nature would like, I think.
Absolutely. I agree with you on the kudzu question. I know this is like going to be a hot topic, but the kudzu's remediating to heavy metals.
Hmm.
So that's I mean, you know this. I'm not really saying it for you, Crystal, obviously. I'm just repeating it for the
Oh, no,
normies.
I totally get it. Yeah.
But so that's why it grows on abandoned farmsteads. That's its favorite place because it's kind of taking back the land. And it's not that necessarily people even used heavy pesticides or metals, but even like tractors, hubcaps, it loves all that stuff. Like it loves
Hmm.
the rust and everything. And I also think the same thing about knotweed. We have a lot of knotweed where I live, and it does come especially along riverbanks and streams where people are using nitrates or manure or specific kinds of chemicals. And but and people will decry it. And I'm not saying that like all knotweed is good knotweed, but it is a very specific for Lyme, especially for we talked about this last time, but like kidneys has like a good kidney signature. It's in Chinese, it's old man's tiger cane. So it's you can use that as a metaphor for other things, obviously, but it like kind of reinvigorates the kidneys and helps reify the jing.
Right.
So
And it's a
y-
great source of resveratrol, and it seems to be more bioavailable in the form of knotweed. I think resveratrol is kind of hard for the body to put to use, and
absolutely.
it seems to be more available in knotweed. Um, I
And
think
it doesn't really
it's in
take over.
kudzu, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yes, it is. It's also in kudzu. So there's that thing is that they add kudzu to a lot of Asian foods as a thickener. So you'll see this in like if you buy treats from Chinatown or like snacks or sweets or things, they will always have like usually it's sometimes kudzu, sometimes it's agar, but it'll be a mixture. So they've actually banned agar here, and this is sort of neither here nor there. But so they've switched to like using a kudzu thickener for a
Interesting.
lot of products.
Huh. That's really cool. I mean, yeah, if it's there, use it. That's what it's there for, I think.
Absolutely. And because we have so many ticks, it just I think it speaks to what you were saying before about how herbs are attracted to like the land to remediate and to also heal the people that live on it. So I think this is like a really important concept. Something that is important to me, particularly since I do not live on the like I don't even live in the part of Canada that I'm from, really. And and we talked about this a little last time. It's just like, can someone who is, we'll say, multifaceted, uh, ever be in tune with the place that they live? And so I would say yes. I know that maybe if you disagree, that's okay. But I think it's possible. I just think it requires like a shifting of frameworks, maybe, and
Yeah,
how I relate to land more than like how I think it relates to me.
that makes perfect sense.
But I thought, why don't you at least discuss a little bit of your book, simply because it is really exciting. I'm always excited for new herbal anything. Like any people can write anything, and I'll read it if it's herbal.
Yeah,
So
I'm the same way. I'm the same way. Um, it's so I was born with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I mean, that's what they say. I'm less and less convinced that it's in my case. I have type 3, which is the hypermobile form. That it's genetic. There's no real genetic test for it other than the recent research that cites the kallikrein genes, which I'm not going to go into too much, but there is a paper out there that posits that hypermobility is a folate deficiency. And I think that that's really interesting because obviously all of our grain is fortified with folic acid. And if you have the MTHFR mutation, which 70 some percent of people have, you can't really use folic acid very well. And so even if you're taking folic acid, it functions as a toxin in your body and you still have a folate deficiency. So um, I noticed that when I started drinking nettle tea, when I started incorporating dark leafy greens into my diet, that I definitely was less hypermobile. Like my Baton score went down. And for anybody who doesn't know, the Baton score or scale is what they use to measure how hypermobile you are. And so the higher the score, the more hypermobile you are. And so, like I said, I'm just less convinced that it's actually like a genetic thing that I was born with and more of an acquired um, syndrome that is a response to not having the right nutrient profile. And part of it is just that because the soil is depleted of nutrients or the plants are blocked from taking up the nutrients from the soil because we're using things like Roundup, um, it's not in the food. And so even if you're eating a really good diet, and you assume that the nutrients are in the food, they may not be. Um, so my book is about the herbs that you can use to support EDS type 3. And Also, other joint hypermobility syndromes. It doesn't have to be Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And a lot of the herbs in there are also generally good for joint health. So in the book, I talk about Agrimony, I talk about Solomon's seal, I talk about Spiderwort and black Cohosh and Shilajit, which is not really a plant, but more of a mineral resin. And I feel like between incorporating all of these plants into my diet, I don't have joint pain anymore. I'm not nearly as hypermobile. I'm still a little stretchy, but not to the point where that I was. So yeah, my book is about how to use all of those herbs, and I'm happy to talk about, what those herbs are a little bit more, and um, how you use them and why. Bec-
Absolutely. We'll definitely talk about that, but let me ask you a quick question, but to precede that maybe
Mhm.
is you mentioned about like the sort of perhaps EDS is n- perhaps like hypothetically you're speculating that it's perhaps not a proper diagnosis but rather like a lacking of a nutrient deficiency, I think is the exact phrase.
Right, right.
How common would you say this is, just in your practice and also in your perspective, in your opinion, more broadly, for chronic illnesses?
I think when I was diagnosed in 2009, I was 23, I think, 24. Maybe I just turned 24. And they sent me to the Weissman Center here in Madison. It's part of University of Wisconsin, to go have genetic counseling to see where this came from. And so they traced both sides of my family, and I found out that I was Ashkenazi Jewish, and that from their perspective, all of this came from that particular part of my family. And EDS was actually listed on the list of rare Jewish diseases back then. And, working at the apothecary now, I see people who come in, they have EDS. It's definitely not rare, and it's definitely not limited to Ashkenazi Jews. So why is that? Why was something that was considered a rare Jewish disease all of a sudden showing up in all sorts of different people of all, ethnicities and backgrounds? And it doesn't seem to be as prolific in other countries. It seems to be, in people who maybe they came here from India and they've been here for a generation or two, and now all of a sudden they have EDS. There was no family background of that. So the only thing that I can come back to is, number one, there's not the nutrients in our food that we need. It's some sort of exposure. It is a lack of a certain food or foods. Like, you are what you eat, right? And so if what you're putting into your body is not really quality, it makes sense that your collagen would reflect that. So I really think that it's becoming more prevalent because our diet in America sucks. And we've become accustomed to dino-shaped chicken nuggets, and that's not really the traditional diet for anybody. Um, so I believe that the more, like I was saying in the last episode, the more traditional foods that you incorporate into your diet, then the more likely you are to feel better. So where my people come from, it's like tiny strip of land between Denmark and Russia. So I find that when I start eating beets, even though I hate beets, I don't like the way that they taste. Nobody in my family eats beets. To me, that speaks very loudly. Um, and also, not to mention, like, consumption of alcohol here in Wisconsin, like that really messes with you too. So I feel like it's a perfect storm. And the more we return to an ancestral diet, whatever that looks like for your people, the less prevalent the EDS stuff will become. But I have no way of proving that until other people start actually doing that. So I feel like I got off in the weeds there, but
Not at all. Honestly, not at all. I swear, I promise. It was great. That's actually interesting that you make the point about ancestral diet, simply because I have incorporated, even though I prefer Asian food, like I'm mixed, like my mom's French Canadian. I've talked about this
Hmm.
before. Been in this whatever this quote unquote country since 1650s, maybe earlier if we want to count other maternal ancestry. But definitely, like I feel rooted here in a way. So I definitely incorporate things that are like maybe perhaps stereotypically Canadian or stereotypically French Canadian into my diet, but I do prefer Asian food. But I often use as much local ingredients, homegrown, and also maple syrup. So I know that sugar is antithetical to pretty much everybody right now, especially, but I am a big believer in like B grade maple syrup. And I know a lot of native people actually use it for medicinal sort of things and soak like young pine needles in it or witch hazel, all of which obviously grow around here. But I use it instead of sugar. I use it instead of palm sugar and anything that calls for, crazy ingredients that are tropical. I try and keep the damp heat down. So I cut out all the tropical ingredients and try and stick local and homegrown and perhaps even indigenous if I can.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I actually just I went to farmers market over the weekend, and there's a seller. They make maple syrup, and they also have the it's like the little dried sugar nugget things, and they're so good. I literally just ate a whole baggie of them. And I realize it's sugar, but there's also minerals in there, so it's not bad, right? Um
Well, that's the thing. It has trace minerals, and you can say that it's remediating in a way because it is nutrifying for your joints. Like that's what a more traditional use would be for maple, would be like
right.
arthritis, the pain. I don't think it has salicins in it, but it might have some in small traces. But I know that's what they used to use, like maple steam, and they do it in the sweat lodge and stuff.
Yeah, and I really love the idea of putting the young pine needles in there. It never occurred to me to do that because, as you know, pine is also used for that cold, damp arthritis that is, really common in this part of the world, especially when the seasons change. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And I feel like we should be using the plants, trees, you name it, that are right outside of our door. Of course, within reason, like you don't want to go harvest somewhere where they just sprayed Roundup. But yeah, um, I'm a really big fan of that. I feel like even if you just incorporate one herb or tree product that is on the land where you live, your health will improve greatly.
Well, it's so interesting you say that because when I first moved here, they have an abundance of self heal and dandelion. And I know everyone's going to say, well, everywhere has a abundance of self heal and dandelion, but the quality of the self heal is really good on the property. There's been there's a plethora of interesting things from a Chinese medicine perspective that I are good for like damp heat, for liver heat, and it's all things that I have struggled with in the past. So I thought that was so interesting. And we have a lot of also scrubby St. John's wort. And that is used in Chinese medicine and it is used for similar ish purposes, more for like how Western herbalists will put it in like ointments and like muscle rubs. So it's called Guan Yu Sao, which is General Guan's herb. And so General Guan is a semi mythical figure. He's kind of like a saint, the saint of Martial Brotherhood is how it's thought of. But he's like a 7 foot tall, red faced guy, and he rides a giant horse that every time it went fast, the thunder would sort of follow it. That's the idea. And so it has like this really martial nature. And I always thought that was so interesting because when you tincture or put it in an oil, it actually turns the oil red as if there's like an innate blood signature. But when you look at the herb itself, it doesn't have a clear doctrine of signatures for Mars. It's kind of
Right.
hidden. I just think that's so interesting.
Yeah, there's no prickles on it or anything like that. It's just yeah, it's I don't necessarily like think in the planets the way that you do, although I read that book Evolutionary Herbalism by Seja Popham, but that's the extent of my ability to speak to, you know, the planets ruling certain plants, but yeah, there are no Martian signatures like nettles. Obviously, anything that is prickly is
Mhm,
going to be Martian,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and I think it's really interesting to me that St. John's wort is so antiviral,
Mhm,
particularly for like herpes viruses, Epstein-Barr. Um, yeah, I feel like that to me when I see the like if I've tinctured St. John's wort, it usually turns this like really blood red color.
mhm,
Um, and it's interesting to incorporate the Chinese aspect where, if you go way back, they think that viruses are demons and parasites are
mhm.
demons. And you'd be able to speak to that better than I can, but and that they live in the blood. And so I feel like that's what the plant is trying to tell us is like if you want to purify your blood of these viruses, etc., then use me.
I totally agree. And I have been trying to, at least in small ways, harvest enough for winter every time, as well as building up my sort of reservoir, I guess, of medicinal plants that I have put in myself. So, working on elder sort of field, I guess, and also staghorn sumac right now.
Oh, I love staghorn sumac.
It's a really interesting plant in the way it colonizes, but like in a gentle way, and then also has that really good blood signature, but maybe different than St. John's wort. Like I'm going to use a planetary thing. I'm sorry, Crystal. It's just that's how my brain works and thinks of the herbs. Um, but it's very Venusian. It has that Venus quality, very astringing to the womb, and it kind of even um, there's a menstrual element. I'm not saying that to be weird, but there is sort of a doctrine of signatures, you could say, about it. And in like in Chinese, we have the amaranth, the bleeding heart, the that we use very similarly for like astringing the womb and also just astringing the bowels in general. And so I can see the parallel between that.
It's really interesting that you bring up the menstrual aspect of St. John's wort because I have a coworker who has rough cycles, and she finds that when she uses her St. John's wort religiously, no pun intended, that she doesn't get a lot of the same PMS issues that she gets if she doesn't take it. So there's definitely like a menstrual aspect to it, and I don't know if that's I don't really think of St. John's wort as acting on blood stasis or, blood stagnation, but I feel like it works on the blood in a very unique way. And maybe it's more like a spiritual affinity for the blood rather than like a, breaking up stagnation the way
I
that
think you
yarrow
just hit
does.
it. I think you just hit it. It's like there's a spiritual element to it. And of course there is with yarrow and agrimony. Agrimony, another herb I'm very fond of as a Sagittarius. It is kind of like my well, at least one of them. At least one of my the herbs that I would consider like my quote unquote totem. I just love the spiritual meaning. I love that it both attracts and repels lightning. I like that it's used against black magic specifically,
Mhm.
and even in Cree
Yeah.
medicine, they use it a lot in medicine bags specifically for that purpose. And they'll even put it in. They even adopted some of the Christian symbolism around it, like calling it steeplewort and just different things. So it's just a herb I really like, and I love the yellow flower. It's very Jupiterian. Well, not all, I guess I shouldn't say that because not all agrimony has a yellow flower, but some of them do. And it has that nice bile Jupiter signature. So just an herb I really like. I'm always excited about
Yeah,
agrimony.
no, agrimony is one of my favorite herbs, and I've seen it. Matt Wood talks about how agrimony is an herb for justice and how it can kind of uh, provoke fate, if you will. So if you touch agrimony, you work with it, you sit with it, whatever, you bond with it, take communion with it, if you will. Um, that it has a tendency to make things happen that are meant to happen. And I've seen this work so many times, and every time it does, it always kind of freaks me out because I I swear like it if you want something and it's coming from the right place, like it's not a selfish desire or, whatever. Um and you go burn some agrimony, or you take some agrimony in a tincture or in a tea, next thing you know, something will happen. Somebody will start talking about the thing that you were just wishing for, and in such a way that it twists fate to your favor. And it's really fascinating. So it's really helpful for like, one of the reasons I started taking agrimony was, I'm 40 years old at this point. I was maybe 36. And I was waking up like 3 times at night to go pee. Like that. I'm way too young for that. That shouldn't happen. So clearly my bladder needed some tonification. And as soon as I started taking the agrimony, I stopped waking up at all to pee. And so I feel like it's such a unique, interesting herb. And of course there's like a bladder connection with how fear and not really knowing what the future brings. So I guess I don't know, what point I'm making there, but I feel like it is a magical herb, and it tends to resolve issues in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And I've also heard that it's really good for bilocation. Like if you're, doing a meditation practice where you want to appear to somebody. Um, I've looked and looked and looked for more information on that, but I haven't been able to find anything.
So I think you make a great point, like all around. I don't think you meander at all. Like from someone who actually does meander, Crystal, I'll say my judgment is that you don't. Um, I think you're totally right about agrimony. It's so magical that it almost its purposes are so myriad. I think even in the body, like in TCM, they would definitely think this is for toxic heat or damp heat. Specifically, it would be for wounds. It's actually their preference for wound sort of single rather than yarrow, which is not really in common TCM practice. And so I think that's really interesting because you kind of brought it up in terms of the urogenital, but it's the same. It's a similar kind of action, maybe you could say, or it's even if you want to go more metaphysical, it's like bringing things, everything in back in, and it's like
Right.
bringing you into your own presence. And exactly the way you said, it's like destroying the fear before you.
Yeah. Yeah. It helps you move forward in a way that is with confidence and not fearful. And I also believe that obviously it's used for, according to the old texts, like Culpeper, like naughty livers, right? And so it has an affinity for all of these different body systems, one of them being the liver. And obviously, you know this, but the Hun, the dream spirit or the dream soul, correct me if I'm not using the right lingo there, anchors in the liver. And one of the things that I found when I started taking agrimony regularly, um, it seemed to strengthen my aura or make my aura bigger. Um, I s-
Absolutely. Yeah, this makes total sense to me. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
no, 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 it's fine. And when I started appearing in other people's dreams when I was taking the agrimony. And like usually in a good way, not like nightmares or anything. But making recommendations like, "Oh, you should be taking this herb." And it's just so funny whenever I take agrimony, I'll get like 3 people within the week, messaging me and being like, "Hey, I dreamed of you and you told me to switch from B12 to B complex," or you told me to take this one plant, and then they'll describe it. And when I figure out what plant it was that I told them in the dream to take, I'm like, "Oh yeah, you definitely need that." So I'm like, "You should listen to me. I'm smart in the dream realm." And I think that's one of the things that agrimony does is it's almost like it allows your Hun to go further out into the dream realm when you're sleeping. And I think that's one of the reasons that I don't wake up as much to pee. Like it's my Hun is free to wander. And so I feel like it's an herb that is very specific for the Hun.
I agree with you. And you did. You do a great job on TCM Crystal, and especially the metaphysics. I thought you did so great last time. I was like, oh, I don't even need to say anything. It's like so great. I could just be you on the rejects, not me. But no, I agree with you 100%. This makes sense in the metaphysics of it. Matt does talk about agrimony as like one of his sort of like spiritual things. Obviously, we talked a little bit about its uses and both internally, sort of that layer of metaphysics, but also like maybe spiritually. It's a typical Jupiter herb. It's like both beneficial, beneficent, and it does have that. I think you touched on it, that specific power to sort of attract things, to magnetize good things. So it doesn't surprise me at all that would kind of allow you to sort of cross the threshold, if you want to use that metaphor, or in dreams, obviously, because that is a principle of Jupiter. That is something that people don't often associate with Jupiter, but if you are familiar with like the keys of Solomon, greater and lesser, but particularly greater, it talks about this is one of the primary uses of Jupiter is spirituality, and this obviously corresponds to like Vedic astrology, and that they call Jupiter guru planet. So it's associated with these higher spiritual principles, higher spiritual goals. Even you could say theurgical, sort of like you're practicing. Like like when I wake up in the morning, I don't do this every morning anymore, but I'm getting back on it. But when you do sadhana or you do any practices like that, you are sort of building your capacity to, yeah, increase your shakti, increase your prana, or increase your life force. So the that agrimony allows you without obstacle to sort of go through these things and with higher intention. Yeah, that completely makes sense to me.
Yeah, and part of the reason that I mentioned it in the book is a lot of people that have EDS tend to have weaker bladders, and they tend to be, and I'm not trying to like, you know, say that this is all people that have EDS, but it tends to cause more fear. Again, like fear of the unknown. Like a lot of people, they don't know that they have EDS. They know that they've been in pain since they were children, and everything is kind of poo-pooed by doctors and their parents. Like, oh, well, you're too young to have arthritis. You're too young to have that kind of pain. It's all in your head. And so you kind of just learn to live with it. And even if you did know that you have EDS, there's not really a whole lot of solutions that, Western medicine has. They say, oh, wear compression stockings and um, don't do yoga and avoid being in hot weather. Like, okay, well, some of that's avoidable, but not always. Um, I find that agrimony, it really gives you the confidence that you need to excel in life. And it like I said, it really seems to have an affinity for the liver and the bladder, and it helps keep things moving, and it's mildly astringent, and so it kind of tonifies lax tissues. And that's why I chose it for the book. It's less the metaphysical stuff, although that is relevant. The more you know about these things, the more you can see that all of it is related. I'm
It's
sure
all
you,
related,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. It's just, here in America, we don't tend to think about the
I know.
metaphysical stuff.
I'm sorry, Crystal. I try and bring that, but I was hopefully leaning on also your practical application of it, and more scientific, rigorous nature that you bring to it. So
Oh, no,
if
no,
I
no.
went too
It's
far, that's okay. But
no, 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 no. That wasn't, no, I was not complaining. I think it's great. I think it's awesome. I'm glad that we can talk about all of these different aspects of it, because they're all important and they're all related, even though they may not seem like it to somebody who isn't well versed in either herbs or the metaphysical realm. And
absolutely.
so, yeah, I feel like that's one of the reasons I included it in my book. And I feel like it's been very helpful for me with really just, I don't know, things that you wouldn't really think to, you know, treat is the wrong word because the FDA will get mad at me, but um things that go along with EDS that you wouldn't necessarily think of as a real symptom. A lot of people are more locked into like, oh, well, my knees hurt, my shoulders sublux. Um there's all sorts of different things that can go wrong, and agrimony is kind of um yeah, like it heals the soul more than it acts on the physical body, although it does, tonify the bladder and the things that I mentioned. And like you said, it's like a good wound wart. And, if you're constantly, gently bumping up against things and bruising because you have EDS, the agrimony is going to speed up your healing process, I think.
No, it absolutely. That would be a specific indication. Would be bruising at the color level of like purple.
Yeah.
Would be
Yeah.
agrimony. Yeah.
And some people say that it's anti-parasitic, although maybe it's weakly so, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I think it probably has and so this is a more classical indication in TCM. And I think Bensky's even references it. But to my knowledge, it has very like low potency when they've done trials of it in China. But as with all herbs, especially with TCM, it's so important to see like what the concoction is or what the specific formulation is, because sometimes they, as you know, I'm saying this for the normies again, but they work in synthesis. They really work as like a whole, like all the constituent parts work a much stronger whole, and they bring out certain qualities depending on what you blend with them and what they would call ministers and princes, and like they have a whole cosmology, sort of like how you can create formulas or amend them. So I think it's so important that to recognize that in a formulation, maybe the properties of agrimony do change.
Yeah, absolutely. It wouldn't surprise me. I could absolutely see it being used more like a synergist, the way that the Western herbalists who practice like triune formulation would use yarrow. And so it makes sense to me that they use agrimony a little bit more than they would use yarrow in China.
Also, probably should have led with this, but one of the indigenous sort of animal, you could say like the kind of animal signatures for agrimony, and this is actually interestingly correlated in Chinese. But agrimony is a horse medicine.
Hmm.
So that kind of perfectly aligns, I think, with EDS and like hypermobility and bruising and bladder and wound wart and everything that you pretty much laid out.
Yeah, I that makes sense to me.
Okay, let's talk about Solomon seal. I know we both love it, but
I
I'll
love
let
Solomon seal.
you explain it.
Solomon seal is, I mean, it's native to the upper Midwest. I'm not sure where it originated, honestly. Um, it's a very demulcent herb that nourishes the yin. Um, in Western herbalism, it's used to heal bones and nerves. And it looks like it's so funny. Like if you look at it really early in the spring, when it first starts to poke out of the soil, it looks like purple fingernails, like a dead person's hand is rising up from the grave. And it's
Very
really,
Saturnian. I'm
yeah,
just gonna throw that out there now. It's very
yeah,
Saturnian from day one.
right. And it's really kind of creepy looking. But and I told this story on Rejects, so I'm just going to repeat it. But the first time I went to go dig it out of my garden to tincture it and make a salve, um, I noticed as I was digging it out of the soil that my hands just, even though I didn't have pain in my hands felt really good. And, this is just me like handling it as I'm harvesting. And it looks like finger bones. It looks like a spinal column. It kind of just depends on, what the root looks like that you're actually, harvesting. But I've seen big, long stalk or big, long roots of Solomon seal that literally look exactly like a spine. And then, of course, you'll have like little rootlets that come off of it. And I think that those are a signature for the nerves. And it's very almost slippery. So, what I take that to mean is that if you have like dry, brittle bones, like you might have an EDS, then it's going to put some of that moisture back into the bones. It's going to put the moisture back into the nerves, and it's going to make your bones more flexible and pliable and less prone to like brittle breaks, especially like say you're in, Canadian or Wisconsin winter and it's just super brittle and cold outside. And you're a lot more likely if you fall to like shatter an elbow or a bone. And Solomon seal can be used to kind of ward that off. And
So
oh,
sorry,
go ahead.
Crystal. No,
No, go
no, no,
ahead.
I don't. I just want to add that it is a ghost medicine. That's what the
Oh,
doctrine of signatures would be. So everything you're saying, like every single component of like bringing life back to the body, bring moisture back, bring the yin back, bring that kind of sort of the primordial waters, you could say, bringing that back in. That is very much how I think of it as well.
yeah, and the like dead man's hand coming out of the ground, very ghosty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very exactly. And that's
um,
a good sponge for it too, is like to repel evil spirits. So again,
right.
all things sort of align in a way. Once you sort of see it, it kind of makes sense, the craziness.
Right, exactly, exactly. And this is, like I said earlier, why flower essences and understanding what flower essences are used for is so handy in understanding the herb itself. Because, if you can understand the spiritual aspects of the plant, you can apply those to humans. And you'll often find that the humans who have those spiritual issues also have physical issues because everything trickles down. So I like to tell people, like, you can work from the bottom up or you can work from the top down. And working from the top down would be using flower essences before you use really potent medicinal herbs. Some people are really sensitive, especially people with EDS. So you might want to start with something like flower essences before you actually start dealing with the physical issues. And, if you're in physical pain, um, Solomon seal is a really great herb to um, resolve some of that pain, whether it's neuropathic in the nerves or it's bone pain or joint pain. It really helps rebuild the joints. It helps give the nutrients that you need to repair those joints. It's in a way like similar to collagen in that it is giving you that lubrication back that maybe you're missing. And it's also a great source of inulin. So you saw my chicory post a little bit ago. Um,
I do love a turquoise flower. What can I say?
yeah, yeah. And it's funny because that's why I posted the white one too, because I've been seeing a whole bunch of flowers that are usually purple that are white, and I don't really know what to make of that. So,
I mean, we don't have
um,
to get into it, but it is very aeonic. It is very like of this, at least in my speculative kind of vision of the world, I guess. But yeah, that would make sense to me. Just in we're shifting sort of astrological times. So
mhm,
we're kind of lessening the density of, because purple's a very dense color. That's how it would be considered in Kabbalah. Is like it's a very worldly, synthetic color. But at the higher vibration is like pink is a higher vibration. We talked a little bit about this with Spiderwort and sort of that its natural inclination to turn pink in the face of radiation.
right.
And so that's what it is. It's kind of a de-densifying of that purple quality.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And like I said in the last episode, I feel like maybe those flowers in particular are more specific for, yeah, the ethereal body, um, your your higher spirit, your higher soul, however you want to phrase that, your higher self. Um, Maybe those are more specific for, like I said, working from the top down rather than the bottom up. I consider the bottom up being like, okay, you're going to take Shilajit and you're going to rebuild your body one cell at a time from
Absolutely.
the ground up. Obviously it's coming from the rocks, so it's coming from the ground, even though it may come from way up high in the mountain. Um, versus the flower essences, which are more spirit medicine or soul medicine.
Well, it is interesting because Shilajit is like that kind of gooey black brown color.
Hmm.
But in Vajrayana, we would also consider that with purple. So those could sometimes be interchangeable in iconography.
Oh, interesting.
So it has exactly like what you're saying. Like it has a purposeful earthy quality, like a earthly quality, maybe not earthy, but earthly quality. And so more maybe more potent on the physical body because I'm thinking of one of my other favorite herbs, which we don't have to get into, but I just blue flag is one of my personal favorites, something I have always identified with. And that the more potent and the better quality is considered to be darker purple. So I don't know. I think that perhaps you're right in that the more physiological characteristic of its action is maybe better expressed in the darker quality, and then at the higher quality, at the higher level, or maybe the more etheric body. I love that you said that. that would correlate to white and maybe a little bit of turquoise blue.
Right, right. And if you look at that picture of the chicory, the core is more purple, and then obviously all of the flower petals are white. And so I feel like the flowers are telling you something like, if you need this particular medicine, use me. And like I said, I've seen more white spiderwort flowers in the last couple of years than I ever have before. And it's pretty few and far between. I might see one plant that is white versus, 100 that are purple. So, I don't really know how to interpret that other than what we were just talking about. So I do think that in terms of spiderwort, like the darker purple seems to be much more potent in terms of like the medicine. And we use spiderwort for nourishing cerebrospinal fluid and any sort of spine pain, brain inflammation, um, whether it's, because you have a fever or encephalitis or dementia, any ADHD, anything where there's like a brain inflammation or a spinal inflammation. And so, yeah, I feel like there's something to what you just said for sure.
Well, it looks like even Doctrine of Signatures, just like at a superficial layer, it looks like brain dendrites.
Yeah,
I mean, I think you've
absolutely.
made this case before too. It's not like I'm saying something original, but I'm just thinking of it, and in my mind, I'm like, it's like it looks because I have one growing in my garden, and I look at it and I always think like, what does this look like to me? And so when you said that, when you made that first post about it, I was like, click, okay, this totally makes sense for how it grows, what it likes, where it likes, the kind of like moisture level it likes, and they're very hardy is which is what one of
Yeah.
the things I really like about them. They kind of like are I don't want to say unkillable, but for an inexperienced gardener, it's one of the best things.
Yeah, for sure. And I have a fun story about spiderwort. I tinctured the current tincture that I have. I started last year, and I'd never heard anything about spiderwort until I heard Bob Lindy, one of my teachers, my main teacher, um, talk about it. And he said it's the only plant that he knows of that nourishes cerebrospinal fluid. And as you know, like Matthew Wood just wrote a book about the extracellular matrix a few years ago. And I was in one of Matt's classes, and I don't remember the context, but somebody said something about cerebrospinal fluid. And I mentioned that spiderwort was used for nourishing cerebrospinal fluid, CSF leaks, everything that I just mentioned. And Matt actually responded in the chat, which he does not really do very often. He's like, I didn't know that it was used for that. And I was like, I didn't either until Bob told me. And obviously, like I'm a good test case. So last year I tinctured some, and it's been sitting in my liquor cabinet for a year. And earlier this year, I knew I had been exposed to COVID because every time I get COVID, I don't really get sick anymore, but I get really violent Tarantino-esque dreams. And it's not even like they're not nightmares. It's like watching a Tarantino movie while I'm asleep, like comical levels of violence, right? And so I started seeing that in my dreams. And I'm like, oh, this would be a good time to test that spiderwort. And so I took 4 dropperfuls of it, and I had been having consistent dreams like that for at least 2 weeks, every single night, multiple dreams a night. And they stopped immediately. Like no dreams that night. In fact, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, "Oh, wow, my spine feels all like squiggly wiggly. Like it doesn't hurt. There's no stiffness. Nothing feels out of place." And so since that experience, I actually almost didn't include that in my book, but because I had that experience, I went back and I like wrote another chapter. And I feel like that's a really helpful plant for anybody that has spinal stiffness or spinal discomfort, any kind of inflammation, because I knew that it worked like right away because of having 2 weeks worth of violent nightmares. And so I was really excited to see it work that way. And one of the things I really love about Spiderwort is that you can harvest the stems and you can prepare them like asparagus, so you can actually eat it as food. And when you cook it, you've seen this in my tweet about it. There's like this viscous, um, I mean, it almost looks like cervical fluid, like sticky, clear, viscous fluid that comes out of the stem. And that's a signature for the cerebrospinal fluid and maybe the cervical fluid as well, because there's definitely like a brain
Absolutely.
ovary connection.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, in the
so,
flower itself, it
right,
looks kind of like there's a very ovarian shape right in the flower
100%.
itself.
Yeah, and I never even noticed that, but I mentioned that in my book because the woman who I work with that illustrated my book, her name
It's a
is,
beautifully illustrated book. Just let me say for people who haven't seen
thank
your
you.
tweets on it, it's beautiful.
I will tell her. She's very shy, but she loves hearing feedback.
We love good Kino on this show. So
Yeah. So when I was talking to her about Spiderwort, and she's also an herbalist, so we can talk like herbalists do, like you and I are. And she mentioned that she's like, "Oh yeah, the buds that are unopened really resemble an ovary." And I was like, "Huh, I didn't notice that before, but you're absolutely right." And so I feel like there's definitely it has an affinity for the female reproductive system. And I'm sure it has an affinity for the male reproductive system as well, because you could look at the little buds and see, oh, that looks like an ovary, but it also kind of looks like a testy, you know?
right. No, you're totally right. There is a kind of overlay, a kind of overlap between those two things for sure. And even when you were
Yeah,
describing one of your things for taking it for dreams, it it is very leggy, but it's not leggy as in like it doesn't spray all over. It's actually tidy, but it can be on other things, but it doesn't take them over, in my experience.
right. Yeah,
So it's like
100%.
supportive almost. It's like a supportive thing, but it's also flexible and like it can grow in like a relatively small space. And if it needs to get bigger, it actually does. It doesn't limit itself to just its square footage, you could say.
Right. Yeah. And it's when you see the plant, like the stalk itself is very kind of stiff. And like you said, it's not leggy, but it is kind of leggy in the stem. And it just has the big jumbled nest of flower buds. And like the I'm not a botanist, so I don't know the part that actually is the flower bud. It's like a big mess. Uh, I don't know. I don't know the botany word, but it just looks like a nest, and it's really, really, really neat. And I think that those are signature for the tangles in the brain that happen when
Mhm,
you
mhm,
get
mhm.
dementia or Alzheimer's.
I think that use makes complete sense just from even just looking at it. But the interesting thing of what you're saying is it takes sort of that more like you had to open my eyes to seeing that I will say hidden or inner part of the fluid and how much that is like cerebral spinal fluid. So once you
Hmm.
did that, I was able to see, oh yeah, there must be obviously the lower reproductive elements as well because those are similar. So, but it took you to sort of crack that break that out of that idea for me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is really interesting is like, if you partner herbs. So, for instance, you take the nourishing cerebrospinal fluid aspect of the spiderwort, and you use the black cohosh for its ability to like detangle those little pockets of cerebrospinal fluid, like Matt Wood says, that you can get after you're in a car accident, or um, if you've just been in a bunch of toxic relationships. Like those emotional memories are kind of stored in the fascia, and I feel like the spiderwort acts on the cerebrospinal fluid and the fascia. And it definitely, one of the things I noticed in my dreams after I started taking the spiderwort, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but bear with me,
Not
um,
at all.
is is that I noticed these emotional memories coming up. Like in my case, like I had kind of a traumatic childhood. Everybody has, but like mine was particularly traumatic in a lot of ways. But I started seeing in my dreams like toys that I had as a kid. And like not just like a toy that I owned, but like a box, like a toy in the box that it came in. Like why? Unless it's these emotional memories to the surface. So if you use herbs in conjunction, like with a specific purpose in mind, like I said, black cohosh decongests and kind of releases emotional memories that are stored in your fascia and helps unwind these pockets where cerebrospinal fluid gets caught. Between those two herbs, you can really just do a lot for helping yourself to clear a lot of these toxic emotional memories that might be the root cause of some of your pain. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that sometimes it's emotional memory, not necessarily anything that is physically wrong. And of course, you can incorporate essences as well. Um, but that's my experience. I feel like those two plants in particular have an affinity for cerebrospinal fluid in different ways. And so if you can learn to pair herbs like be really sensitive, like 10 herbs up, certainly don't you want to formulate, like say you're making a tincture, right? You don't necessarily want to take 10 herbs, throw them in a jar, pour alcohol over it, pray over it, whatever. Like that's not really a good herbalism, in my opinion.
I
It's
totally
different.
agree. Totally agree.
It's different if you're an experienced Chinese herbalist and you know how to pre-treat every herb that you're using and you're putting them in a formula, knowing how they interact with each other. But in the case of like the herbs that I mentioned in my book, you wouldn't necessarily want to like throw them all in at once, right? You don't necessarily want to introduce everything at once. Say you pick one or two and you choose what you want to work on first. And I feel like Spiderwort and Black Cohosh would be a good partnership to work on emotional memories. If you've got spinal inflammation that leads to like ovarian inflammation or brain inflammation, because it's all an axis, right? So if you're trying to clear emotional memories that might be the root of your pain, physical pain, those two would be a um, good partners for that.
I love that. I love that because I have a lot of black cohosh growing, and it does love a little bit of shade, a lot, and like it likes a lot, to be honest. But
Oh,
it
yeah.
also likes sun too. It's not totally averse, but and so does Spiderwort, like some shade. So it makes sense to partner them together. They would occur in the same kind of woodland environments, maybe not in the same colony, but they would be in the similar environments. And it also likes a little bit of that wet feet. And I know Karen Saunders talks a lot about black cohosh and blue cohosh, which she uses interchangeably. I know that there's a question about that because they are a different species, but okay, neither here nor there, excuse me. And but she talks about how it sort of is such a strong medicine for women in particular, but also for, well, she says something funny, so I'm just gonna cite her so it's not me being weird. It's she uses it often for blue balls. That's what she says. So I think that's really interesting, and I also think like from a spiritual component, like a indigenous sort of spiritual medicine, it would be sort of a plague repellent, an enemy repellent. One of the common names is bugbane. So you can see, and even in TCM, it's also it's definitely much used very differently. It's a plague medicine, so it's used for people who have a lot of wind heat or from acute those goo demons that we were discussing a little bit before. So that's what it would be. It would be sort of invading infection. And so
Right.
that's where it would be used. But I do think there's an interesting overlap just in the common name. But I definitely think that they make a very it's an unexpected but interesting companionship.
Right. And to your point, it's kind of funny that you said like they don't necessarily like live in the same exact place, but generally. So like I have spiderwort growing prolifically on one side of my garden and I live on a corner lot. So like if you picture the spiderwort growing on the furthest most corner from where the black cohosh is, they're in the same garden, but they're not right next to each other. So I just thought that that was interesting. And yeah, like black cohosh, the flower essence is used for toxic love, toxic relationships broadly, um, for shining a light on darkness. whether it's emotional darkness, or say you have some memory or something that is kind of lodged deep down inside. The black cohosh is going to help bring that to the surface, and apparently so does the spiderwort. So that's why I say I feel like they're unique partners for
I like that.
emotional, spiritual, and also physical things. So in Matt Wood's book, the Book of Herbal Wisdom, he talks about how he gave an ex-girlfriend a couple of drops of black cohosh, and he immediately, like seconds later, she says that this formula annoys her, and she started kind of moving her head. And if you take black cohosh and you start kind of gently moving your head, you'll feel all of that fascia releasing, and it kind of crackles. It's like having grains of sand under your skin, in a good way. It's very cathartic. And so
That
yeah,
yeah, no, I'm sorry, Dom. No.
no, 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 you're fine.
Yeah, Krystal, I'm sorry. I'm so used to your at.
I answer to
But
both, so no worries.
no, you're Krystal. Because we've already met, so it's I apologize, but it is funny. It's happened to me a few times, but I guess yeah, because my ad is different than my actual name. So but no, I totally agree with you. I think it's interesting that you align them because I've heard it discussed for lower cerebral or lower back pain.
Hmm.
So it makes complete sense to me if you're saying that maybe the spiderwort acts at like the higher order, maybe like the brain level, and then the black cohosh is more rooted, more supportive of the lower level. I don't know, just an interesting maybe way to think of them coming together in synthesis.
Right, right. Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I also think it's interesting, black cohosh, once it's open, it's kind of open. It looks like a bottle brush almost. Um, White flowers, obviously, for people who don't know. And
I have some black ones, I will say.
really,
But
that's
yes,
cool.
yeah,
You're gonna have to send me a picture of
I
that.
will. I will. I'll go take some after.
But spiderwort, obviously, one flower a day opens. It's open for about half the day, right? And then it closes, and the next day another one opens. And it's that's the light aspect, right? Like I think I just commented to somebody on Twitter about that, and how like the spiderwort seems to really respond to the light. In the black cohosh, I'm sure you can use like the flower, especially before it opens. It looks like those little pockets. It's kind of a signature for those cerebrospinal fluid pockets that we were mentioning. Um, that is more, but the root is traditionally used. So to your point, like it's low back. It it kind of works on the bottom where the spiderwort works on the top. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense to me, but maybe I'm too out there. So, but no, absolutely what you're saying. I'm seeing it in my mind. It makes sense, and as we said, like sometimes plant families they don't have to be next to each other to be sort of in dialogue.
Right, right. Well, and I mean, that's the glory of mycelium, right? Like all of the plants communicate through the mycelium. So even if they're not close to each other, they can still talk through the other plants.
Absolutely. And so, why don't we end with, I think you said mullen. Is that correct, or am I incorrect?
I talked about Mullen in the beginning,
In the
but I'm
beginning,
happy
yes.
to talk about
Oh
Mullen
no,
again.
so we did agrimony, Solomon seal, extensive spiderwort, some black cohosh, quite a lot of black cohosh. Is so I'll let you decide. What herb would you like to end on, Crystal?
Um, Man, you're putting me on the spot here. I'm
I'm
trying to
sorry.
remember all. No, 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 you're fine. I'm trying to remember all the flowers I talk about in my book. We can talk about Shilajit if you want. I feel like
Sure,
we
if
we
you like.
covered it in the last episode, but we didn't really talk too much about Shilajit in this one. And I guess, there's a whole lot of really cool stuff you could talk about with Shilajit. I mean, it does a million things. In the last episode, I kind of talked about how Shilajit, it starts at the base of your spine and it moves up, and it slow walks you towards enlightenment, as they would say. But for the purposes of EDS, what it does is it upregulates the genes that code for collagen production. And So I believe, and it's also a source of micronutrients that are no longer in our diet. So there's humic acid, there's fulvic acid, and then there's all sorts of vitamins and minerals and fatty acids that are in the Shilajit. And so um, if you're taking microdosing, because it's a small dose herb, if you're taking that every day, you're telling your body, first of all, you're giving your body what it needs to function ideally. And as soon as I started taking Shilajit in 2018, and I talk about this in my book, but I came across it completely by accident. And I think, it's funny. This is, the higher power that is tapping me on the shoulder and like poking fun at me at the same time. Um, but I found it in a High Times article. And the whole article was talking about, oh, if you take Shilajit, then you get just as high from a smaller amount of weed. And I was like, oh, cool. I could use less weed, And it kind of tricked me into trying it. And I ordered this stuff from Russia, which I can no longer get. Um, and it was fairly inexpensive. Shilajit is like laughably expensive if you go on, I don't know, TikTok or whatever, and you see people hawking their Shilajit brand. Um, but I got 250 grams for like $17. So I ordered a whole bunch of it. I tried small doses, I tried large doses. I didn't really notice that it made me feel any higher, but I did notice that I got a lot less flexible. And I had a head injury in 2000. And so I got hit right below my left eye. And I think because I had scar tissue and like stagnation in there, over the years, if you look at my photos of my face, like my face had become kind of like lopsided. And like I said in the last episode, I call this GMO potato face. So I see this a lot with people who eat the standard American diet. But in my case, I think it was from getting hit in the head and also standard American diet. But my point is, I had a lopsided face. So if you look at old pictures of me, you can see it. And if you look at my updated driver's license photos, you can see where my jaw starts to correct. My cheekbone, my jaw, it starts to become much more symmetrical. And that's really what the Shilajit does, is it helps deposit those minerals back into your bones. And it helps your body create collagen that is not faulty. And I think the way that it does that is because it's giving you these micronutrients that you need in an ideal world, that we are no longer getting from our diet. And so one of the things I noticed, because of course I'm not going to take this mystery substance without testing it first. I'm certainly not going to give it to other people. I might use myself as a guinea pig, but I also use my
I've done that
plants.
many times.
Oh yeah.
Where I've like to, not that I give it to people, but just to test things on myself. Like I'm the best arbiter of what something really is, right?
Exactly. Right. So like I did the same with pine pollen before I gave it to people, being like, "Oh, here's testosterone." No, let's test it on me because I'm a woman and I don't want people getting sick from it. If I tell women to start taking it, like I don't want them to suddenly develop a wicked case of PCOS, right? I didn't develop PCOS from pine pollen for the record, but um I tested the Shilajit on my plants. And so I have these aloe plants. Um and I kind of like put a bunch, wrapped it around the root of the plant and gave it some water. And the plant kind of started looking sickly for a couple of weeks. And I was like, oh God, this isn't going to work out so well, is it? But then maybe a week later, it's kind of a rosette formation, the way that aloe grows. And so right in the center of the base of the plant, it was starting to get this really bright, brand new, vibrant green. And as I gave the plant water and time passed, the whole plant became really bright green and vibrant. And like, the little teeth that grow along the edges of the aloe leaves, they got really sharp. Those little white dots started to appear on it more after a period of this like rusty brown color. And then it started having babies everywhere. And I see that. I've used that in multiple plants now. So it's not just, the aloe, it's any plant that I give this to. And it's because you're giving it really good soil and you're giving it all the nutrients that it needs to reproduce and to thrive. And it does the same thing for humans. It's just that we're a lot bigger than an aloe plant. So it takes more time and more Shilajit to kind of get you back to where you need to be. But I can say, I've been taking Shilajit, like I said, since 2018, and it's 2025 now, so 7 years. And I feel like it's essentially rebuilt me from scrap. And
That's incredible.
yeah, yeah. And I've seen it do this in other people now too. Like I've seen it take a man who is got the classical American dad bod and GMO potato face and just like turn him into the Greek statue version of himself. And so it's a really amazing substance. And you know, it's kind of hard to find a really quality brand. The one that I trust is Banyan Botanicals, comes in little tablets. Get whatever source you can. I just tell people to test it. It shouldn't burn. If you put it in water, it should completely dissolve. There shouldn't be little rocks or sediment at the bottom. Once you stir it up, it kind of goes into a colloid. Um, that's how it should be. That's good Shilajit. And there's different kinds. They're not all black, but I've only used the black and maybe the copper heavy one. It's called Braxshun. You might know more about that than I do.
I'm relatively familiar with it. I did order it after we spoke about it on the last episode, and I am convinced by the things you have to say about it, so I'm going to try it. And I just immediately on hearing you explain it, it's interesting that you added it to aloe because I think in the last episode I even said like Shilajit to me has like a Saturnian nature. It's sort of like bringing things into the body, bringing things into material reality. And aloe is a very magical plant, especially like in the Southwest and in like northern Mexican Curandrismo. It's considered to have like a unique plant spirit among a lot of plants that have unique plant spirits.
Hmm.
So it has like a female sort of very Venus. It's obviously juicy. It's like it has a lot of Venus signatures used for the skin. That's obviously a good one. And burns in particular because Mars is said to like have his sights set upon Venus. So he when he gazes at her, it produces fire. So she has to sort of be the renatured water, you could say, to sort of heal the burns. And I think it makes total sense. I just think it's really interesting that you added it to aloe since those are considered to be like just the almost maybe lower angels of healing in a way.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, the aloe plant that I added it to, I bought from my grandmother. She died in 2012. And I bought it for her just from IKEA. It was not like a high quality, it's aloe, bless the aloe plant, but it was $3 from IKEA. And I inherited it after she died, and so it's just had babies everywhere. So I have all of these different, uh, pots of aloe everywhere, and that's just what I had handy. And that's why I
Well,
chose that.
like the medicine, like as you said, the medicine reproduces as you need it. So
Right,
one
right.
day someone will come to you with a burn and say crystal, and you'll have the aloe to heal them. So
Exactly. Yeah.
well, I appreciate this so much, Crystal, and I think you did a great job. You didn't meander at all. I swear, I promise. And thank you again for agreeing to do this. I know that people will be surprised and interested. Well, interested what you have to say. Maybe surprised that I know anything about plants in general, since it's not usually what I discuss. But I had an incredible time, and so please, if you want to come back anytime, just let me know. Yeah,
Yeah,
any topic,
absolutely.
you're absolutely welcome anytime.
Yeah, it would
And
be a blast. And
okay.
I appreciate everything that you know, like about Tibetan Buddhism and all of that. I feel like you've been a good resource for me. I've had a couple of weird dreams that I know I've told you about, and you offered some good insight. So, yes, thank you for that.
You're very welcome. And I try not to, just so people listening don't get the wrong idea. I don't go full supernatural. I'm not like this is totally supernatural. I try and do a reasonable middle path perspective. So that's what Crystal's kind of referring to. And so thank you for saying that, Crystal, to your book, which I will, of course, include in the show notes and make sure that everybody at least sees the link so they can grab it for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.